Hi, everyone. My name is Robin Runge, and I am the chair of the ABA's Civil Rights and Social Justice section for 2023 to 2024. And it is my privilege and honor to chair our chair chat this week with one of my new favorite people. You know, it's funny when you're younger, people say that as you get older, you actually don't make new friends. And I just want to say that that is not my experience. And our speaker today, who is an amazing leader within the section and the ABA more broadly, but also in the nation on critical human rights issues, is now one of my new friends. And I love that. And I love that about this life. And that is a privilege and an honor. So, Nathan, thank you so much for giving your time to us today in recognition of Transgender Day of Remembrance, and as you have just educated me, resilience, which I love.
Thank you.
I love the evolution. I love the evolution. So I'm going to introduce you, and then let's just get into some really key issues around the barriers that transgender individuals face in accessing legal education and in becoming lawyers. And then also some of the key issues that you are in the middle of right now, fighting for transgender rights. So Nathan is an attorney and advocate. He was born and raised in the Tampa Bay area. He has served the people of Florida in several roles, including working as a classroom teacher and later as a nonprofit executive, including leading a Florida LGBTQ plus youth center and Florida's largest LGBTQ plus pride, St. Pete Pride. You know, and I just realized I've just done the alphabet thing, and I'm just going to actually say what those words mean, because this is part of what we're doing, right?
Yes.
So I should say a leading Florida lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer plus organization. Following his leadership at St. Pete Pride, Nathan became the first transgender statewide appointed official in the United States when he served as Florida's LGBTQ plus consumer advocate at the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services under Commissioner Nikki Freed's leadership. Nathan's lifelong commitment for justice and equity continues through his practice of law and service as a public policy advocate, providing support and counsel to families, organizations, community leaders, and elected officials. Nathan is a graduate of Stetson's University College of Law and the University of South Florida. While in law school, he was a member of Stetson Law's trial team, dispute resolution board, and Journal of Advocacy in the Law. He continues his commitments to students, coaching Stetson's dispute resolution board, and volunteering for lawyers in literacy as a third grade reading. I love that, third grade reading teacher. He's also Florida's former LGBTQ plus consumer advocate. And then also within our ADA family, which is how I've gotten to know Nathan, he is a leader and a co-chair of our, what we call our SOGI committee, and also is been appointed, right, to the ABA's SOGI commission. So thank you for your service to the ABA. And this is a great plug for the ABA, right? Like if people are wondering why to become a member of the ABA, it's because you get to meet people like Nathan, and I mean that sincerely. So
I appreciate it. I'm so excited. I mean, I started with the ABA as a law student, and I was actually a law student division representative for Stetson for 2 years. So I have been here. Well, now it's almost 10 years ago that I started. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think the place that I really wanted to start with you today is around education. One of the focuses this year for the section is really walking the walk in addition to talking the talk. What I mean by that is really focusing on equality and inclusion and all of our work and our programming. And one of the things that you and I started talking about when we spent some quality time together at the annual meeting in Denver was education and awareness within the bar, right?
Yes.
And so one of the key ways to start with it is demystification of language. So, you know, people, well-meaning people struggle with terminology, and yet it's incredibly important. It's incredibly important for us to be thoughtful and respectful in how we use language. And so if you could just take a few minutes and help us understand, right, what does transgender mean? What does it mean to say transgender man, transgender woman?
Sure.
What is the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation just for a
Yeah.
second? That would really be awesome.
Yeah, we'll just do a really quick overview because I will say there is more technical knowledge, for folks that litigate, Title VII, Title IX cases involving discrimination faced by the LGBTQ community. There's different language for that. And you just introduced our SOGI committee and our SOGI commission, right? There's language for that. And in pleadings, we might talk about transgender status. But if you're not a part of that sort of work, what does the acronym mean? And I
Right.
get that.
I didn't even do that. Thank you.
Yeah, I get that. So, sexual orientation, has to do with who you love, right? Your family dynamic, and the plus in the LGBTQ plus. There are many acronyms for organizations. They self-select, self-determine that as a part of their strategic planning. But there are a lot of members of our community that are included within that plus, right? And so we also have to look at gender identity, which is when we're talking about, who we are as humans based on sex that might have been assigned at birth and just put on a document, not based on any testing or any awareness of who an individual was. No one, asks a baby, who they are. But what we know is as humans through human development and as we mature into adolescence and adulthood, we self-determine who we are. And so we have names within the gender identity spectrum for different communities. So identifying as transgender means I was assigned one gender at birth in documentation. And then for me personally, and I have to keep it local because transgender and gender identity can mean different things. And I think that's part of the confusion.
Yes,
that
that's very helpful.
Somebody to identify if you are non-binary, what does that mean?
Right.
If you're gender queer, what does that mean? Right. You're gender non-conforming. And I think our language is, as Americans, is complicated, but it has a lot of different aspects. So for me, I was assigned female at birth, and I have, I talk about that very clearly because people don't always know what that means. And I have transitioned, and I'm a male attorney practicing law here in the state of Florida, greatly impacted by the political realities. But I think that's sort of it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And over the decades that I've done work, different ways that we have talked about community members, different language. If you're in the medical community, you might have different language there as well. It's clinical language, but practical language. The easiest thing I could say to folks, Robin, is you always want to make sure folks self-identify who they are, share their pronouns, share their affirming name, share their story. And that's the most precise and the best way to really know and understand, who's in your world and in your universe, whether they're a friend, a coworker, a neighbor, somebody that you might be across the table from in a proceeding, a judge on the bench. And in many aspects, it's not relevant to the work we do as attorneys, but sometimes it's unfortunately very relevant to the work we do.
Yep, absolutely. So what great advice, Nathan. And thank you for that introduction. And so SOGI, right, stands for sexual orientation and gender identity. And I think that really highlights the things you were just saying, right? Between gender identity and sexual identity. And so I just appreciate that so much. And just where you left us at the end of that is so critical, which is always ask, right? Always ask. What are your pronouns? How do you identify? I mean, I think people are afraid to ask sometimes, and they think asking is offensive. And in fact, it's the inverse. As someone who has had a name, Robin, my whole life, I've told many stories about how I would send emails and people would presume I was male, right? And then they would learn by talking on the phone with me or having a Zoom call more recently that I'm female, and then they stop responding to my emails, which is a whole other set of problems.
But absolutely, we make assumptions based on
I've had things addressed to me, Mr. Robin Runge, my whole life. Right. So thank you.
It becomes important when we're looking especially at identity documents, legal identification, because we have so many states now allowing for non-binary markers on driver's licenses. and our passports from the federal government. And so we really do have to understand that we cannot make a presumption about a name, and it is beyond, you know, just being transgender. It's about a number of things, but
exactly. And all these things are linked, right?
Yes.
And you and others have been fighting for decades for that, those options to be added to driver's licenses, right? And to have access to services. And so I think that's a great segue into the next part of our conversation, which is, I don't think that people fully appreciate or understand the barriers that transgender individuals face in accessing higher education, the becoming a member of the bar, you know. So I think I don't fully understand, right, the challenges that transgender individuals face applying to law school in this context, you know, and then once they complete law school, applying for the bar exam. That's a perfect example of what we were just talking about and what kinds of information. And then, as you were just alluding to, you were in Florida, which is a particularly challenging place, and I am understating it tremendously, place to live and to practice law as a transgender individual. And I think one of the missions of our section, right, is to ensure that everyone and anyone can become a member of the bar, and that we're diversifying, right, the bar membership. And so I'd love for you to highlight for us and educate us a little bit about what some of the key challenges are that transgender individuals face in trying to become a member of the legal profession.
Sure. So I think my journey to law school is one experience, but there are issues that came up for me that I know have come up for other folks. So the short story, you know, I postponed going to law school, frankly, for some time because of my journey. You know, it took me off my dream from when I was in high school. I did speech and debate in high school. I think everybody presumed I was going to become a lawyer. And then I didn't. And when I finally found the time and made the decision with my family to pursue law school, I registered, you know, on the website, the LSAC, you register at that point. So this was about a decade ago. Applications were online and electronic, which for some folks watching this, they'll be like, wow, it was super amazing. But there was a box to check to identify, you know, in ways, you know, if you're a veteran, you know, any community you identify with. And I checked the box for LGBTQ. And they also indicated maybe some scholarship opportunities. And I thought that was great. And I did get some recruitment letters from organizations, you know, from universities interested in who I was. And that was interesting, and ultimately was a part of the reason I chose to come home to Florida. I was in Portland, Oregon at that time. And I came home to Florida to be near my family, my mother, but I was really impressed with the intentionality and empowering LGBTQ students at Florida's oldest, you know, law school, which happens to be a private university, and that's important to note in today's environment. But then I didn't know when I finally wrapped up and needed to apply to the bar. There were certainly some complications as I was a law student, but my university was remarkably supportive. They had not had, from my understanding, an out transgender student. I asked some questions, and I usually, you know, the answer was yes. We didn't have, you know, gender affirming, you know, restrooms, and they're like, sure, we can do some of those. And so Professor asked, and they provided that. Our Lambda Legal Society did a lot of work with healthcare law and the Black Law Student Association, and I mean, we had a lot of, like, you know, intersectional programming. It was great. As well as school wound down, then I had to apply to the bar. And that's when I realized it was going to get complicated. I had transitioned later in life. I had had many years in employment. I'd also been in the military, Robin. I was discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That was complicated. And my records were a mismatch. And so
so when you apply for the bar, you know, you're having to supply people, you know, just for our law student audience out there, just so you know, you are literally going to have to go back like 20 years. I mean, if you have
And that
20
was a
years.
lot.
Some people are so young, they don't have 20 years, but people like you and me, like,
Yeah,
you know, and so they really dig up. I just want to clarify why this is relevant, right? Someone listening, you know, maybe like, why does it matter what you did 10 or 15 years, you know, or who you were 10 or 15 years before you applied to law school? Well, this is why, because they are going to ask you. Yeah.
Yep. I had no idea.
Moral turpitude. Is that right? Is it moral turpitude?
Yes.
I remember, I think that was the only time I had ever heard that term, right? And how they interpret that, right?
Yes. Yeah, no. So I was challenged. One, my law school entrance essay also involved talking about my journey and who I was. So that all became a part of my application to the Florida bar, which I didn't know. And that threw me. And I suppose I could have done more research and been informed on that, but I didn't know. But then I applied, and then I started getting a lot of requests that required explaining where there was mismatch in documentation. And then I got a request.
For example, in terms of your name, okay, and your pronouns, for example. I just want to be clear about kind of what the questions were. Yeah.
And I had updated everything. So my name and gender on all of my identity documents had been updated. But when they do a background check, flags were coming back and there was a mismatch. And they asked to explain it and explain it and explain it. This took years. And I eventually got a request that my name change order, which had been done in the state of Oregon, needed to be approved by the Florida Supreme Court. Well, procedurally, there's no option for that. And that letter, to be honest, was sort of the straw that kind of broke my back. And I actually put my application on pause because I had retained counsel. It had taken me years to put it together. I had almost crossed the finish line. And I ended up taking the job serving as an executive director to an LGBTQ youth center. And I didn't need the license for that. And so I said, I got to pause it. But I circled back. And I finally, you know, after I left that position, I said, I got to do this. This is why I've waited my whole life to be a lawyer. I got to suck it up and fight for myself. I'm an advocate for a lot of other people, but I just hadn't quite finished, you know, this particular journey for me. And so I dove back in, committed, and finally was accepted to the Florida bar. And one of the first things I did, you know, I hadn't been in touch with some of my ABA colleagues, and I'm like, that's it. I've got to come back into the advocacy of the profession. And one of the first things I shared was this story, and we put this together through the SOGI Commission and with the support of CRSJ to put a resolution together to just recognize intended or unintended consequences for students like me and the barriers we face. I think there are ways we can do this better. And that's, we were able to pass that, and it was an honor to present that to the House of Delegates. And here I am now, you know, in practice, and it's exciting.
Oh my gosh, Nathan. I mean, so how many years was it? But, you know, and I just want to say, like, for many people watching this, you know, our big thing was, am I going to pass the bar exam? Right? Like, that's our big thing.
No,
and
I
honestly,
passed that the first time.
Right, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Like, you did the hard part, like, from my, you know, and so this is the naivete, and this is really important. When we talk about access to justice, when we talk about access to the legal profession, this is what we're talking about, right? We're not, you know, I think it's so important, and I so appreciate you being open about your experience, and that it took years and retaining counsel, right? And I'm thrilled. I'm sorry, first of all. I'm so thrilled that you overcame all those barriers to become a member of the bar. And I'm so proud that the section, right, and the commission and you were able to put together that resolution that you presented. And so now the ABA has policy on this to really utilize in state bars across the country, because this is unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable.
It was 5 years from graduation to basically getting my bar card. But it took decades for me to circle back. But I will say, I mean, I continue to serve as a mentor to our LGBTQ student group. And when I dug into the research, there are increasing numbers of LGBTQ law students, you know, attending law school, wanting to get into the profession. So my experience has really been able to inform my advocacy. And I think a lot of the work I do in presenting to different groups about why this is valuable, because sometimes it's a question,
Right.
you know, are there
Right.
really, do we really need to work on this? And we do.
Oh, we do. And you know, I know you know this, but I'm just going to say it. For students, any student, but especially transgender students, whether they're out or not, to see you
Yes.
at the school, right?
Yes.
For you to be that mentor, you represent what's possible, right? Like, you know, I don't know if you had that for you, but for me, I needed to see women, right? I'm a little old, but you know, it was the same. You know, like I grew up at a time when women didn't, but I mean, so you were a trailblazer and now a beacon, right? You represent what's possible. And I just, I'm so thrilled to have you, you know, leading the section, all right, in all of these issues and leading the Bar Association, frankly, in all of these issues. And again, I'm just so horrified to hear about the challenges that you faced. And, you know, what people don't realize is there's costs, financial costs, mental and emotional costs, right? Associated with that. But, well, so for my last question, oh, go ahead.
I'm going to honor some people here real quick, because there were mentors. Like you know, I was a member of the National LGBTQ Bar Association. We have launched a trans bar association. In my years when I was in law school and when I was, you know, connecting at ABA conferences as a law student, I met some phenomenal folks over those years, and there were mentors, but not many, right?
Yeah.
So I got to meet Shannon Mintor and Tyler Broaddus and Joe Fry and others. Like, there were people before me, and I would have joined the fight sooner if I could have. So we do have some fabulous champions that have been active, and more coming. But when I go back to my law school, there are far more LGBTQ students ready to jump in, and especially trans and non-binary students. And there's an expectation, depending on where you live in the country, that certainly our law schools, our legal education, and the profession, and our bar associations are ready for us. And I know that's not the case everywhere.
No.
But the ABA certainly takes the lead to encourage this and to set policy that makes sure that we're recognizing that our profession represents the full fabric of our country.
That's right. And that it's welcoming, right?
Yeah.
There's a difference between begrudgingly, after a fight, right? Allowing, and this language just pisses me off beyond comprehension, allowing certain populations into a space. There's a difference between that and welcomeness. And I think that's something we're still on a journey to do. So, well, thank you. My last question for you, as I alluded to during my introduction of you, is that you are on the front lines of some of the most significant battles for LGBTQ rights, but specifically transgender rights in the United States. You know, the uptick in attacks of rights in the last 10 years has been so horrific, and has been coupled with, you know, increased violence, honestly. And, you know, it's a connection that I don't think everyone understands and necessarily right away, right? The combination of attacks on rights with increased violence. And it's a direct connection, right? So I know there's many key issues that you're struggling and grappling with right now, but if you could highlight a couple for us to make sure that we're aware of them, that would be great.
And and I'll do that by sort of grounding us again on why this is the date that we're doing this together, this Transgender Day of Remembrance and Resilience. Because just recently, just this past weekend, and I know this might air a couple days later, but in the month of the end of October, a young woman in Florida was murdered quite violently in front of her grandmother, and her name is London Price. When we come together and have vigils around Trans Day of Remembrance and Resilience, we honor and we say their names and we share their stories. And typically, we unfortunately have to keep longer lists year over year, and these murders are typically quite violent and underreported. And so while we may know year over year how many we think, we don't really know. And so
that's right. You just know the reported ones. That's right.
That's right. And so what is complicating that right now in some states especially is the political rhetoric that sort of leans into, I think, unfortunately, elevating and trying to normalize hate speech and homophobia and transphobia. And in October alone, what we knew was there were 5 murders of young trans humans, all of those young Black trans humans, and 4 of the 5 were due to gun violence. And that's fairly typical year over year. So we have to really, I think, recognize why it's important to recognize the intersectionality of the work and the violence.
Absolutely.
And
I'm so sorry.
Yep. And the community, the local community came together to provide resources and counseling and held a vigil. But in the middle of this, we're dealing with the real reality that we're starting legislative sessions soon for many states. We're in the midst of a lot of litigation. We're still unraveling what recent new laws mean. So in Florida alone, we've got bans and limitations on gender affirming healthcare. We have a bathroom ban in place. We have a sports ban. We have a number.
So I'm going to stop you and ask you to unpack those 3 things, right? Those are 3 huge things, right? So when you talk about a sports ban and issues around access to bathrooms, again, I feel like the news does this in a way that does not increase accessibility and inclusion. By explaining what that means, if you could help us understand and why it's so important. Why is it so important, these things, right? Like, that's the other thing that gets skipped.
Because there are sound bites, so you just get the headlines.
Right.
So a sports ban has come up, that's been in sort of the legislation trend the last several years. There have been a number of these passed in a number of states, often put forward around arguing around leveling the playing field for women, as though supporting equity in athletics takes away from elevating, women's ability to be competitive and in competitive sports. And we're talking about sports bans for playing sports from little bitty kiddos, kindergarten, first grade, up to professional athletes, college, collegiate level. And I think there's a big spectrum of types of athletes. I played some sports pretty seriously, but I was really bad at others. And so sometimes it's really just about teaching teamwork and fun, right? And dexterity and
to clarify, Nathan, these are not total bans. Are they? They're not saying if you're transgender, you cannot participate, but they're saying what? They're saying
that you must be on the team based on your sex assigned at birth. And so I think those are the most restrictive, and they go all the way up through the collegiate level. And we're starting to see that now in other professional sports evolve. Right. And so I think what's of note there, professional sports organizations, whether international, national, state, high school athletic associations, before this discussion and this rhetoric began, there were policies and procedures in place for years that would allow folks to lean in and become a part of sports teams. And that unfortunately has been unraveled. And I think why the sports ban is top of mind, actually this morning, Robin, a decision for the case filed here in Florida was released, and unfortunately that case was dismissed. There are some limiting grounds for amending the complaint. I haven't even finished reading the decision. It was pretty heartbreaking to see where the arguments were, but in a nutshell, I think this idea that it's arguable that there's a legitimate state interest in policing athletics is of grave concern. I think around larger issues of equity.
I was going to say it's setting a precedent, right? Yeah,
it is. That's right. Yeah. So when we talk
I want to highlight what I know, and this is a little bit I know, and that is that recently the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights issued updated regulations around discrimination. They're called Title IX regulations that prohibit sex discrimination in higher education generally, but there's been a historical focus on sports. And that the updated regulations that have been issued took a position that basically ensured that no one would be happy, which, right? And so I just want to lift up for folks that these are issues on the state level, right? States are quickly passing legislation to to limit an individual's ability to play a sport because we have sex segregated sports a lot. By the way, we just need to say that there are some sports that are not, but most professional, even varsity, for example, level sports in high schools are all sex segregated, right? And so there is this determination being made. And instead of allowing a person, right, to own their gender identity and say, I am, and I get to play here, and there's a lot of conversations about puberty and when the transition occurred. But so I just want to highlight for folks, if you want to see kind of what they're perceiving as a middle ground, is where the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights landed, which is it's, you know, pre or post puberty, and that they didn't ban it. They said there needs to be a process, right, and an intentionality around it. And that's what I mean, because a lot of people believe that, you know, any individual should be able to play on any sports team that is of the gender identity that they share with that group. And the other side is, no, what you just said is you must play with a team that correlates with your sex assigned at birth, right? And so this, what I've just described to you, there's going to be a lot of litigation. That's the other bottom line, right?
And there has,
ton of litigation.
And I think we'll see circuit splits like we are in lots of other areas of law, and it will probably go all the way up. And in the meantime, I guess the cautionary tale and sort of looking historically, most of this legislation came about trying to solve a problem that never existed. And
right. Well, and that is a great segue into the bathroom, the regulation of the bathroom that you use, right? Like, I think this is a prime example of this. Is you know, requiring again, right, that people must use a restroom that is correlates with sex identity at birth. I would say the most ingenious way to deal with this, of course, is sex or gender neutral bathrooms. That's my favorite choice, in case anyone's wondering. And by the way, I prefer a single restroom. Anybody's wondering. But you know, great example of where, you know, we are inclusive for everyone and we all benefit, right? Like,
and as an advocate, I think that's a great thing to encourage in new construction. So speaking of the education piece you were talking about, we have this bathroom ban that in Florida is effective for all government-owned businesses or buildings. So anything that gets any kind of funding from government, which is much more expansive than I think a lot of people realize. And we're dealing with a bathroom ban, and that was in place before the school year. There were not policies put in place. They just knew this law existed, while we were also adjusting to don't say LGBTQ, which was originally marketed, and the advocates were originally calling it don't say gay, but that was really don't say LGBTQ. Then last year it was don't say LGBTQ 2.0. There's litigation pending on both versions and different aspects of that law. But the restroom becomes difficult, I think, especially for school-age children, because the buildings don't allow for single-use facilities.
That's right.
For the most part. And if they do, they're in a very inconvenient location, perhaps in the nurse's office. And it basically flags, I think, for classmates that this child is different. And it's that a lot of youth and their parents, you know, don't want to, but may take advantage of it. And that's their right to, I think, choose and self-determine a safety plan for their child in partnership with the school, which again, for years, we have been doing before these recent changes in law. So I think the sports ban, as an attorney, sort of narrowing down to our law students that are in public universities, those of us that work in courtrooms, that attend, that work within government agencies, work for the state of Florida. Unfortunately, if you're an employee, there's one follow-up punishment. And if you're a member of the public, there's a different follow or punishment. But they did allow for basically a third-degree misdemeanor if you break this law. And the way it's enforced is
for you, if you violate the bathroom rule, if you go to the bathroom that you identify with based on your gender identity.
If you're asked to leave and you don't leave, then that's when, I think, in practice, you'd be trespassed and it would be upon your return. But technically, could they? Yes, they could push for a third. But for an employee perspective, where this is troubling, rulemaking, administrative rulemaking is a muck. I mean, all these new laws that have passed, and I can only speak to Florida, but I know this is the case in other states. We now have to then put those new laws in practice, and that happens through a rulemaking process. And I never knew when I took admin law, and I took a lot of admin law in law school, how much
I did too.
So it's only slightly more exciting than tax law, but hey, I like it.
I tell my students every year, take that class. I swear to you, it's gonna come back to haunt.
I do. I use it all the time, and I'm grateful.
I use it all the time too.
Yeah. Much appreciation, Professor Bauer. I might send you this link just so you know. I appreciate you so much. But the reality is they're taking those, and I think we really have some unpromulgated rules and potential challenges that will come down. But the state system,
these are going to be litigated for years, is your point, right? Like this is, yeah.
But let me tell you what the state college in Florida decided recently. If you are told once, you get a warning, the second time you're fired. So it's a fireable offense. That's what they determined in their rulemaking. And
if the state used the wrong restroom.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Nathan, so, I hate to do this, but I'm gonna close us out. But
I know, and there's more coming.
I just want to thank you for your friendship, but also for your work as an ally and a member of the bar. And I just want to say to our audience, if any of the things that you have heard Nathan and I talk about today are of interest to you, if you are interested in joining the fight, and I hope you are, that you will reach out to the American Bar Association, and in particular to the Civil Rights and Social Justice section, because we would love to have you. And these are some of the most critical fights going on in the country right now. And you too might be lucky enough to call Nathan your friend. So thank you for your time today and always. And I look forward to continuing to learn from you and continuing to support this incredibly important work. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I want to encourage folks to support LGBTQ students, certainly in scholarships and beyond. And if you're in a community and you want to support the trans community, there is probably a local led trans organization in your community. They will need your support, your time, your treasure. Please consider. And if you need help finding those organizations, reach out to our SOGI committee and we can certainly help connect you as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nathan.
Thank you. Yes.